What's up, y'all, and welcome to another installment of the For the Gram podcast. This is a show where I, Jaksyn, am your host, and I just talk about something that's of interest to me. It could be like current events, or it could be something that's happening right now, or it could just be like a hip trend or something like that. But in the end, it just has to be worthy enough for the gram. In this week's episode, I'm going to start it off by talking about something that I want to be more of like a recurring segment throughout the show. And so I'm going to call this little segment Behind the Hype, right? So this is something that has been like popular throughout the years, and it's like popular throughout America or whatever, but I'm only realizing it after it's cool, right? So this week I want to talk about one of my favorite pastimes that I've been taking part in over the summer months, and that is disc golf. Yeah, so this is a really special thing to kick it off with because we kind of discovered disc golf, we being me and my family, as it was like rising in popularity. So my sister is a year older than I am, and she took a disc golf class in college. That's crazy to think about, that you can just take like classes geared towards specific sports once you get to college instead of taking like normal gym credits and things like that. But she took a disc golf class, and part of her homework for that class was to go to a disc golf course and play some holes of disc golf. And she had to complete a certain amount of rounds by the end of the semester. And so she would do that, and naturally, in the world of having 4 siblings, you often got roped into a lot of those disc golfing experiences, right? So when we first started, we had one starter pack of discs, which in disc golf, you have driving discs, you have mid-range discs, and you have putters. And so it's a lot like the sport of ball golf, where you have the drivers and the wedges and the pitches and your putters and things like that, but it's limited down to just 3 different discs. But these discs do all different sorts of things, from fading from the right to the left after you throw it, fading from left to the right, just going straight, going really, really high, known for rolling really well, things like that. And so when we first started, we just had one of each that we had to share amongst the 4 people or whatever that would go. And I'm not one to drive. I can do a lot of the things that you'd want to do with a driver with a mid-range, because the mid-range cuts through the air a little bit better. So I often drive with a mid-range. So my sister would have the driver and I would have the mid-range, and then we would have to switch periodically throughout. But now it's a lifestyle. We were involved in it for maybe 4 months before we got our own discs. So there was a point in time where we were just running with 3, and then for some holiday, I don't remember which one of that year, we got 2 more starter packs of discs, right? So we had about 9 discs to share amongst the 7 of us. And then my dad is a nerd. It's where I get it from. I'm a nerd. But he went through and he started researching all of these discs and things like that. And this is what happens when you get sucked into disc golf. So if you're not ready for a lifetime commitment, then like you're going to have to look somewhere else. But like some people are able to just play disc golf recreationally, just for fun every now and again. But once you buy that first disc, you're hooked. But like I said, once you buy that first disc, it's a lifestyle, right? So right now, it's been 2-3 years since I started playing disc golf. I have about 40 discs right now, which is substantial. That's like a lot for a amateur player to have, someone who's like not that great but can handle themselves a little bit, um so what we did was we branched out and we were able to go to a warehouse that had a bunch of discs stored in this warehouse. And this was a place called Gotta Go, Gotta Throw. If you're in the Minneapolis area, it's in a place called Golden Valley, and it's about 45 minutes away from where I live right now. And so it was an interesting experience because picking that first disc is always funky a little bit, just because you don't really know what your throw style is, but unless you do, which I did when I first started. I knew I needed an overstable disc for my first disc. And so my first disc was a electric blue mint disc Bobcat. So the three of you listening to this that knows what that is, that's cool, right? Like, I found one that had the right flight pattern for me, and this thing purrs, like this thing hums through the air, and I throw it so well now. But when I first started, I was like, I cannot lose this disc because it is the first disc that I ever bought with my own money. And that's a thing with disc golf as well, is in comparison to ball golf, right, is it's significantly less expensive. It can get about as expensive as ball golf, but in ball golf, you have to buy the bag and you have to buy the clubs, and the clubs are all rather expensive if you want like good, nice quality ones. But with disc golf, every disc ranges from anywhere from $5 to $30, depending on the quality of the disc, depending on what company manufactures it, and things like that. So you can buy a lot of discs for a fraction of the price of a set of golf clubs, right? So in the time that I have been playing disc golf, I have a lot of drivers, a lot of mid-ranges, and like 5 or 6 putters. Like, I don't have that many putters. I have more approach discs than I do putters, which is saying something, just because I like to throw it a little bit further than a putter would allow me to do. But I am still able to use my putter whenever I'm within close range of the basket. Another thing with disc golf is that most courses are free. The vast majority of them are, because they're in like public parks and campgrounds and things like that. It's to the point where if my family is traveling somewhere, or if I'm traveling somewhere with my friends, we scope out to see if there's a disc golf course in the area so that we can just go do a thing for a couple hours. And that's fun too. Like, my family used to be a big zoo family. Like, when we'd go on vacation, we would go and scope out the area for a zoo to go see, because animals are crazy, But now it's disc golf. We go and we scope out disc golf courses that we can go play at whenever we have some downtime, or if we just have like an hour to kill or something like that. But at the same time, there are some trips where you have to factor in another hour or two just to go and disc golf, because it does take a little bit of time to play an entire round of disc golf, even if it's just 9 holes. 9 holes for 2 people typically takes about an hour. And that's with good conditions. Like if there's a lot of wind, you're not going to want to be playing for that long, but you also are going to have to take into account the wind when you throw, right? So the discs are going to fly differently depending on what conditions you're playing in. And then another good thing about disc golf is you have to like walk up before you let your disc fly through the air, right? And so with tee pads in disc golf, there's typically a concrete slab about 6 feet long that you're able to do your walk-ups on and then let them soar. But some of the courses in my area don't have that. And so you're just running through the mud trying to throw disc. And like there are some obstacles that you have to look out for a lot of the time. Like trees are a big one. There's a term in disc golf called first available, which is the first tree you hit off the tee pad. And if you hit it, then everyone makes fun of you, and it's really humbling experience. But then you know that the next time they hit first available, you're going to be like, haha, you hit it too, look at that. And yeah, so disc golf has been on the rise a lot recently. The Disc Golf Pro Tour has been popularized a lot more in the recent years. And so, like, you're starting to get more disc golf as, like, more disc golf recognizability, right? So I think the Olympics is even adding disc golf as an Olympic level event, which I don't know if that's even fair because most of the disc golfers are from America or from the US. So we might have to branch out a little bit more in terms of that before we like add it to the entirety of the Olympics. But disc golf is fun. I enjoy it. I am not great by any means, but I'm a bogey golfer typically. I am not ashamed to admit that. I cannot putt to save my life, but my AVR sometimes hums through the air and makes some crazy putts. But if you understand what that means, hey, give yourself a high five. You play disc golf. But disc golf is just something that we, as my family is concerned, have been a little behind on, but we've been getting into it to the point where 5 out of the 7 of my family members have their own disc golf bags and their own sets of discs and things like that. And the thing with disc golf is you can go to a disc golf place and you can buy used discs for like $4, $3 a lot of the time. And those end up being your water hole discs, the ones that you're high risk of losing, that you could just be like, oh, I don't care much about this disc. I'm just going to yeet it and see what happens. And if I lose it, that's fine. If I keep it, that's cool too. I get to use it on another risky hole. And then another thing with disc golf is you put your name and your phone number on the inside of all of the discs. So then if you ever lose one and somebody magically finds it, then they can call you and be like, hey, I have your disc. There was one time we were disc golfing in the area where I go to college, and one of my friends found a Firebird on the course, and so he called the number and they didn't answer. And then like 10 minutes later he gets a text being like, the Firebird, dang it, I really need that back. So then they ended up driving like 30 minutes or something to go give this guy his disc back. And it's a nice tight, close-knit community, all the disc golfers who just play for fun. Like, if you're a little slower on the course, you can have people play through and things like that, and then you always get, like, a nod, and they're like, have a good day, cool, and you just meet a bunch of crazy people on the disc golf course, and that's always fun. It's a nice way to grow the community aspect of things a little bit. But that's all I have to say for disc golf right now. I'm sure it'll come up eventually. again, just because it is something that I do quite often. But that's just the basics of what I have to say about disc golf. Another thing that I'm like really interested in now is just like puzzles. Like I've always been a puzzle guy, right? So ever since I can remember, I would like put puzzles together and my parents would have no idea why I had this fascination with puzzles. And my favorite puzzles were the animal puzzles because I am an animal guy and that's always been cool. And they always had cool animals that I would never see in the zoo where I grew up. And so I'd put like the elephant together and the armadillo and the panda bear and stuff like that. And then I just had a lot of puzzles growing up. And then once you started getting into your 100-piece, 300-piece puzzles, I was like, nope, I'm out. I don't need this much orange that just only correlates to one small section of the puzzle. That's for another day. But now, as I get older, it's transitioning into more of brain teasers and like word games and things like that. So a big one is the New York Times. Well, before the New York Times owned it, it was its own individual thing. But there's this daily phenomenon called Wordle. If you're unaware of what the Wordle is, you are missing out a little bit. So this Wordle is this game where you have to guess a 5-letter word in 6 tries. And there's a new one every day. And so everybody has their starting word, right? And their starting word is a word that typically eliminates like a lot of vowels, a lot of your common like Wheel of Fortune type, commonly most used letters in the English language. You use your first word to typically get a lot of those out of the way. A big popular one was adieu, like ADIEU, and that one got 4 out of the 5 vowels just right off the bat, so you knew. And then if you get a letter right but in the wrong spot in the word, you get a yellow. And if you get a letter right in the correct spot in the word, you get a green. And then if it's neither of those, it's gray, right? And there's been a ton of different expansions off of Wordle. There's like the Quirtle, which is 4, and then there's probably more. I think there's one where there's 8. There's one where there's 32 Wordles that you have a certain amount of guesses before you can complete all of these Wordles. And there's apparently like a big deal about these daily games, right? And so much so that it was a really big deal when the New York Times bought it. Like, the New York Times company was like, hey, we make the crossword puzzle, and people aren't playing the crossword puzzle as much anymore because they're playing this daily Wordle thing. So we're gonna go and buy them. And so they did. And I was just waiting for the day when they put a paywall on it. So then it wasn't free, because that was the thing about Wordle. It was a once a day thing and it was free. And you could like go through and do it every day, and then you could send the results to your friends and brag about how few guesses you got the Wordle in and make them feel stupid. And then the next day they would get it in 2 and you would get it in 6 and you would be really, really sad. But there was a time where it was just not owned and it was free. And then the New York Times bought it, and I was waiting for the day that they would put a paywall on it, so then you couldn't play it for free anymore. And now we're getting there. Like, it's not entirely behind a paywall yet, but now you do have to make an account with the New York Times in order to view your results. And that, I'm like, okay, this is fine. I just don't want to have to pay for it yet. And so far, they're doing good with that. And then they have a bunch of other spin-offs of Wordle. right? They have a football one called Wordle, named after Eric Weddle. They have a Pokemon one called Squirtle, where you go through and you guess different Pokemon based on their like generation and types and things like that. And then there's all the different variations of the actual Wordle game itself. And there's a bunch of different things that you can do with that. And then the New York Times added a bunch of other games themselves, right? So they added Wordle, and they have Strands, which is like a word search type thing. And then they have Connections, which is like you have 16 things and you have to group them with like commonalities that they share and stuff like that. But the New York Times has really taken the puzzle game to the next level, right? They started with the crossword, and everybody did the crossword, and that was like their big thing, the New York Times crossword puzzle. And now they have Wordle, which is just a thing that a lot of people do. And I remember, I'll never forget this, there was a day in April of this year where my start word was the Wordle. This like never happens. This is like 1 in 144,000 chance or something like that your Wordle is the one that starts it off, right? And so I had to be very careful with this when I announced it to the world. And by the world, I mean my private Instagram story. But there was a way that you could like decode your Wordle answer. So you would put the Wordle puzzle that it was, how many tries you got it in, and then you would put 5 green boxes to say that you had the word, right? A lot of the times you would put like certain gray boxes followed by yellow and green, but I got it on the first try. So I posted that I got it in one guess, and then I had the 5 green squares, and people did not believe me. They were like, what? There's no shot. And the only reason I did it that way was out of respect for people who also play the Wordle, and if they hadn't yet gotten to the Wordle yet, then I didn't want to ruin it for them. So if someone asked me to prove it, I sent it to them. I have the screenshot on my phone still of the day that I got my Wordle in one guess. And now I had to pick a different start word because I knew it wasn't going to be that again for a long time. Because there's just a random generator that sorts through all the words that are 5 letters. It was a great experience. I've gotten several in 2 that should not have been gotten in 2, and then I've gotten several in 3, and then 4 is typically my average. That's where my bell curve like humps over. But I got it in one time, and I am forever ecstatic about the fact that I got it in one guess. And so I was on a high that day. I will never be that high again in terms of excitement factor. But that's my take on Wordle and like all those daily games and puzzles and things like that. But I'm really more of a board game, card game kind of a guy. I do like the daily games, like the aspect of working through a difficult puzzle once a day. Like, I typically do the Wordle and stuff before I even get out of bed, because if I can do it at 6:30 in the morning on like zero energy whatsoever, I can do a lot of things that day. So I start my day with a win by getting the Wordle done in the morning. And so now it's like, I love board games and I love card games. Like, my favorite card game is a game called Exploding Kittens, which only allows 5 players to play it. So that's a limited party game. Like, you can't go to a party with 10 people and play Exploding Kittens because it's only allowed for 5. But card games are getting to the point where they're just useless. Like, a lot of the rules is just like, the point of the game is to win. And you win by drawing cards. The cards will tell you what to do to win. That's it. Like, that's what the extension of the rules are to card games nowadays, right? And board games are getting even more elaborate than they used to be. Like, I remember back when the board games used to just be Clue, Game of Life, Cranium for your trivia games, Monopoly, and Trivial Pursuit, and like all those types of games from like when I was growing up. But now it's like, I have a group of chickens, and I'm trying to stop this fox from stealing all of our eggs in the middle of the night. So what did the chickens do? They band together and they form a battle plan where they make these fences and things like that. This is all hypothetical, of course. I don't know if this is actually a game. If it is, cool. But there's ways that these games just get so story driven and so elaborate. They're just like made by regular people. People just wake up one day and be like, I want to make a board game, and this is what I want it to be like. And I'm like, cool, I will play it one time, and then I will forget about it, and then someone will mention it one day and be like, oh, that was a cool game, that was fun. But, like, I'm a sucker for Settlers of Catan. Like, if you break out Settlers of Catan at a party, I will play it 9 times out of 10. If you break out Apples to Apples or Cards Against Humanity or whatever your word association game of your choice is, like, I will play that 9 times out of 10. Now it's like getting to digital board games. There's this thing called Jackbox where you get a bunch of games for like big groups of people that are like improv skill-based games, and it's just for making things up on the fly, and those are fun, but they're all digital now, so then you can just pull them up on a screen and be like, here's the code, join my game, things like that. And I think that's cool. But one of my favorite board games right now is a game called Telestrations, which is Pictionary meets the telephone game. And that one is fun because I am a horrible artist as it is, and a lot of the people that I play this game with are also horrible artists, so trying to decipher what people are drawing is kind of fun. And if you haven't played this game, I highly encourage you to play it at some point. You've got to have a lot of people so that you can get it from one thing to something completely different, because that was the fun of the telephone game, was it starting with, like, it is cold outside to I want a Whopper from Burger King or something like that. And the craziness, like, we score it in my family, at least. Like, our house rule is we score it from how close you were to the original, but you can also get a point for being the most far off thing possible, and that also is super funny because you could just be like, it was a trampoline and the last one was like a bed of nails or something, and you're like, how did it get to that? I kind of see it, but I don't get it. And then there's like ones that start with like the Wizard of Oz, and then it ends with the 4 basketball players from the 90s or something like that. Like, it could get wildly different, and that I like about that game. So if you haven't played Telestrations, I highly recommend it. You totally should do it. It's great for parties and things like that, social gatherings, housewarming events, things like that. But board games are just fun. Get back into board games. Bring back the board games. Can we do that? Can we bring back the board games? Because the amount of times that I want to play a board game and people are like, oh, I don't have time for this. Like, I get really sad because I'm like, I just want to play this board game, you guys, and you don't want to play it. But it's fine. It's fine. I can always I can always just have my siblings play with me. That's the fun of having a large family, is you could just play board games. But with all that being said, I think we should transition into this week's rendition of 3 things you need to know. So, first of all, if you haven't heard already, this is probably big news in our nation right now. I said I wasn't going to get political on this podcast, and then sure enough, I have talked about politics more often than I've talked about random other things in this segment specifically, but it's things that are current and it's things that people need to know about, I guess. But this past week, we had a crazy turn of events, and former President Donald Trump was shot at in a Pennsylvania campaign rally for his 2024 campaign before the Republican National Convention. He was shot, he got hit in the ear because he turned his head because he was talking to a group of people, and they're still trying to assess whose blame it was. Was it the local police? Was it the Secret Service? But everybody is worried, and Trump does seem to be okay. He did just announce his vice presidential candidate the other day, but this is like a serious thing. Like, assassination attempts are happening because I think I was reading somewhere that if you constantly are comparing this person to some of the worst tyrants in all of world history, someone eventually is going to take things into their own hands and try to do something about it. And so I am just like, okay, I'm not really surprised that this happened, but I am shocked that people in America would do something like this nowadays, right? Like, they've had their discrepancies in politics for the past 8 years, I think, at this point. So this was all the way back to 2016 with that election cycle. Like, we've had our political discrepancies, but assassination attempts is kind of crazy. Like, I don't understand why people are just like, oh, we can't have him be president if he's not alive anymore. But at the same time, I just want everybody to stop dying. And I think that would be a good way to start, is by being like, hey, like, let's not try and kill the people who were voting to rule over us, basically, who were voting to lead us as a nation, things like that. But I was also thinking recently, like, as this whole thing has unfolded, like, what status do you have to be for a attempted murder to be considered an assassination? Like, what level of fame? Is it like a net worth thing? Like, what level of status do you have to have in order for just an attempted murder to be considered an assassination attempt? Like, if somebody tried to kill a police officer in Minneapolis during the George Floyd riots, which I'm sure people did, like, would that be considered attempted murder? Or would that be considered manslaughter? Would that be considered an assassination attempt? Like, what level of status do you have to have for it to be an assassination attempt? Does it just have to be one person? Like, a lone assassin? Like, I don't fully understand that concept, but that's just an interesting thing that has never really been, like, fully clear, I don't think. I think you just have to have some position of power for it to be considered an assassination, but it was failed. It didn't work. The Secret Service caught him relatively quickly afterwards, but it's a sad day. It's a sad day in American history, just to know that we're still not above what we were in the past just because we have a free country, but that doesn't mean we get to do literally everything that we want to. Number 2 on the 3 things you need to know is, so the home run derby was last week. I love the home run derby. Teoscar Hernandez, shout out to him. He did a really, really good job, and he was a power hitter. My underdog pick to win it was Alec Boehm, and he made it to the semis, so I'm proud of him for that. But the newsworthy moment in the home run derby was not the derby itself. It was the national anthem sung beforehand by Ingrid Andress, who is a country singer who's been nominated for 4 Grammys. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This was not pretty. I honestly thought after the first 3 measures of the song that it was a bit, and she was intentionally singing the way that she was singing, but she announced the day after on her social media that she was drunk, she was intoxicated, she was not in her best state, and so she is in an institution right now trying to seek the help that she needs for that. But it was not good. It was crazy, and it set the tone for the whole thing too. Like, people were confused for one, and then Alec Boehm just goes out and hits 20 home runs, and we're just supposed to go on with it. Like, it was a thing with like Fergie in the 2018 NBA All-Star game or something like that when she sang the national anthem, and people have been comparing it to that, and oh man, it was just not good. And I remember when they auto-tuned Alicia Keys during the halftime show of the Super Bowl 58 halftime show with Usher. They auto-tuned her in post, and I was really worried that they were gonna have to auto-tune something like this too. But that's just another thing of how far do they take that? How far do they take the AI voices? How far do they take the auto-tuning in the, like, aftermath of it? But another part of it is this one person who sang at the home run derby this past week she got a lot of searches, she got a lot of clicks, and everybody was like, oh, she's actually not a bad singer, she's been nominated for Grammys for a reason. And it was just a bad night. She just didn't have that great of a night, and I think that's okay. Like, we're all human, aren't we? But you also gotta hold yourself on a higher pedestal a little bit when you're that level of important during, like, something especially as the home run derby. Like, you have to be like, okay, I'm better than this, I need to set an example for people, and that did not happen. So it is what it is. It happened. Like, a lot of the problems with it is we live in a digital generation, so that's going to spread, but eventually it's going to die off, hopefully. Like, I think back to the Chris Rock Will Smith slap incident at the Oscars, which I'll talk about in full detail later, just because I have a lot of things to say about this particular incident. But if that did not happen, we would not remember that joke, because things like this just happen and they're just offbeat, and we have to just laugh it off, and then a lot of the times we just forget about it in the days to come. But since Will Smith did what he did in that Oscar ceremony, we will forever remember what happened, what was the cause for it, and so it's been permanently cemented in people's minds just because of the spectacle of it. So I think this will tone down eventually, but not right now. That's going to take a little time, because we do live in a generation where now everybody is going to look for it, everybody's going to see it, everybody's going to be like, wait, what happened? Okay, let's listen to this. moving on, we got number 3. There was a lady on a plane who she got a first class ticket on a plane from her boyfriend. It was her present from her boyfriend. They were traveling somewhere, so they got 2 seats in first class. And a lady walks up to her and says, "Hey, so there was an error in the booking of the flight, and so my son got sent back in coach, and my daughter got to sit up here with me in first class. Would you mind giving up your seat so that my son can sit up here in first class and have a first class experience?" And so the lady was like, "No, this is my seat. Like, I didn't pay for it, but like, I earned this seat. Like, I've never sat up here. Like, I was excited to sit up in first class." And this mom got noticeably angrier at this lady because she wasn't giving up her seat, and she didn't go around and ask other people. She just sharpened her gaze on this lady and was like, "Oh, so you didn't pay for this seat, but you think you can sit in it, and my son, who has never been in first class before and probably will never be in it again, has to sit back and coach." And so this lady did not give up her seat, and her boyfriend had to step in and be like, "Hey, so I'm a loyalty member of this airline, and I use this airline for work and things like that. So you are losing a very valuable customer today. I will take my business elsewhere." So they went and they did the flight, and the lady was not happy, and the flight attendants were looking at this lady weird, and it was just not that great of an experience for her. She was excited about being in first class, but she was asked to leave, and she said no because she thought she deserved it, which she probably did, and then everybody was giving her a hard time about it, and that was just not okay. That we live in a society where people just feel like they're so entitled to things now, I guess. And the problem isn't with the seats or anything, it's with the airline. The airline had the problem in booking this mom's flight, right? And people were saying in response to the story, they were like, "Yeah, Mom, you sit in coach and let your kids sit in the first class seats and everything's fine. You are comfortable enough sitting in coach, and your kids still get to enjoy first class and stuff like that." And so people took the side of this lady. She was like, "I didn't know if I was doing the right thing or if I should have given up my seat because I didn't technically pay for it." But everybody was like, "No, you stood your ground. You did the right thing. You made sure that you were able to sit there, and that's all the better. You deserve it. Don't feel bad about other people just feeling like they are entitled to things." And she could have asked another person, right? She could have been like, "Hey, is there anybody in first class that would give up their seat for my son?" or something like that. But she didn't. And so it was just almost a targeted experience, which is never good. People thinking that they're the only person allowed to do this thing. And yeah, so that's never a good situation to be in, and it's a modern day situation too, but things like this have been happening for years and years and years. But that is just kind of a note to close 3 things you need to know this week. It wasn't a positive 3 things you need to know, but life isn't always happy things, I guess. But there are some interesting things to pull out of it too. You just have a lot of ways to learn. Pick up yourself and walk away knowing that you learned something along the way. But thank you all for listening to this installment of the For the Gram podcast. If you liked the show or have any feedback whatsoever, you can either DM my Instagram at forthegrahampod, all lowercases, no spaces, or send me an email at forthegrahampod@gmail.com. I really appreciate you guys listening to this episode, and that's going to do it for me in this one. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks for listening.